Good morning. I am calling the meeting of the Historic Resources Commission on July 2nd to order. And we'll do a roll call. Commissioner Alverda? Here. Commissioner Swift? Here. Commissioner Miriam?
That's pretty good. Here. Good morning.
Commissioner Jenkins?
Here.
And Commissioner Phillips? Here.
It's Alberta or Orlando.
Yes, I know, as soon as I said it.
I was going to say,
Before we start our meeting, there were a couple comments I wanted to say. First, I'd like to welcome our guests to this meeting, and I'd like to review the procedure for public comments so everyone is clear about when the floor is open for public comments and what the commissioner's obligations are to those comments. So the public communications is number 4 on the agenda. Each speaker has 1 turn only for speaking and has a 3-minute limit. Our Sustainable and Special Project Planning Department representative has a timer, and so she will make sure that everyone has the same amount of time. Each speaker must address only the commission, not other people in the audience, and not our planning department representative. The commission is under no obligation to answer questions during this time or make comments. The commission may ask our planning department representative for information about a question asked by the speaker, for more information about a topic, or ask that the topic be placed on a future agenda. For all public comments being given, the focus will be once all public comments have been given, the focus will revert to the commission. And the same procedure also goes for agenda items 6 and 7, public hearing items and new business. This July 2nd HRC meeting agenda will be covering consideration of the Historic Resource Preservation Plan application for residents at 2721 East Cliff Drive, a report back on further discussion on demolish of a historic resource application requirements, update on the Redmond House, and continued discussion of historic resources inventory cleanup. So that's what will be on our agenda today. And now we will move on for the approval of minutes. So Annie, so we have on here approval of minutes from February 9th. And we were sent the draft minutes from April 2nd.
Yes, that is an error. I hadn't noticed that. Thank you for pointing it out. The minutes are from the previous meeting on April 2nd. So the minutes from February 9th were already approved at the April meeting. So I will correct the agenda to note that these are the minutes from...
Okay, but we will go ahead and approve the April 2nd minutes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So has all the commissioners read the draft minutes from the April 2nd meeting? Yes. Okay, is there any discussion or comments about the minutes? All right, does someone want to make a motion?
Now we have a motion of February 2nd minutes?
No, April 2nd.
April 2nd minutes.
All right, so Commissioner Orlando has made a motion to approve the April 2nd minutes as written. Is there a second?
Second.
And Commissioner Jenkins has seconded. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, they've been moved and approved. So the next item is public comments. And are there any public comments to be made?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Becky Steinberger. I'm a resident of Aptos. And I just want to thank your commission for approving the recommendation to designate the Silva Barn as an NR5 historic resource in the county. It's really heartening to see that a resident property owner such as Carell and Phil Reeder have done would take the time, the trouble, and the money to make sure that something as valuable as this barn is to our county's historic preservation to do that. And I want to thank you for making the recommendation to the board. I was at the Board of Supervisors meeting last week when it was presented to them and approved, and it was great. And I didn't see any of you there, but it was a really great moment and heartening. And I asked the board to consider giving property tax relief to residents who own properties like this. The Mills Act makes that possible, and they didn't respond at all. But I would like your commission to support that action. I think it would encourage people like the Readers to have some incentive to do what they did just because they care. I also want to ask the commission, when you got your packet for today's meeting, I know that there has been discussion in the past that you get them last minute, so I would like to know when you got your packet. I did not see the materials available on the website until quite late. So I want to know how much advance time you've had to read things and really think about it. And finally, I would like to ask that your commission adopt a policy to declare ex parte communication, especially as we have discussions about the Redmond House, the Redmond Hero House, and other historic properties in the county, and action that you might recommend regarding them. I would like your commission to adopt a policy, as does the Planning Commission, to declare early on any ex parte communication on any items on the agenda. Thank you very much.
So, commissioners, yes.
I'd like to respond. I got my packet Tuesday.
I was just going to ask if the commissioners wanted to address that question or not. So, and I have no problem. I received mine Monday or Tuesday also last week.
I received mine at the same time. Tuesday, I think it was, it came.
Okay. Thank you.
Ed?
Good morning. Just walking into whatever was going on, but
We're on agenda item number 4, public communications.
yes. Well, I wanted to mention that regarding the initial recognition of the meeting, giving us 2 days notice, but if it's on the weekend, it doesn't really give us much of a heads up. So I was wondering if there could be something to where I understand you only have to do it within, what, 48 hours notice? 72? Sure doesn't give us much of a heads up. Does that work the same for you folks as well on the commission?
That's the question we just answered for Becky.
Oh, well, of course I wasn't here, so but that is
No,
one.
Monday, Tuesday last week.
Yeah, so that's being discussed right now.
That's, we told her when we received our packets.
So was it before they gave it to the community, or was
I
it?
don't know, the planning commission, they're the ones, and it's not just this commission, it's for all the commissions, I assume. They follow the same regulations when it comes to mailing to adhere to the Brown Act. So, Annie, Could you please, one, let us know when you put it out for the public, and are you aware if the other commissions, their representatives follow the same procedure and timeline?
So under the Brown Act, agendas are required to be posted and materials made available no less than 72 hours prior to the meeting. So we do have a binder that we make available out in the planning department lobby within 72 hours before the meeting. And in addition, we do post materials on the website when they are available to be posted. In terms of meeting notification, in addition to sending out the agendas no later than 72 hours before the meeting, on the Historic Resources Commission website, the meeting dates are also posted. So if you go to that date, you can keep track of when the next meeting will take place. So there is also that meeting notification available on the Planning Department website.
So Annie, when you give this, because I did get an email from you, which I appreciate, giving it somewhat heads up. The time is sort of interesting, but is there any way you can include that additional information to our emails to give us any kind of grip on preparing for a meeting?
So no, you need to ask us.
Oh, okay, so I'm going to reverse that to
So
you.
what you're asking for, since our meetings are typically on a Monday, so my question is, does that 72 hours include the weekend?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so then I would assume what's available would be either Thursday or Friday, typically probably Friday. So what he's asking is, when you notify him of an upcoming meeting, can you include the agenda in the email, or is that not part of the procedure or what the planning department allows?
Actually, the agenda was included in the notification that was sent out of the meeting.
Okay.
Can I just clarify something?
Wait, I want to say something.
Yes.
Okay. Before we started the meeting, you read
Yes,
about public comment
yes,
and on public communications,
yes.
and maybe it would be good to repeat that, because I think it's important for how we communicate during public communications, so that it's not
Yes.
really a conversation, and it's.
Yes.
I'm a little worried about Ed's getting his 3 minutes to speak. I mean, are you aware that you're now in public communications, and this is your opportunity to speak about, members of the public may speak on items not on the agenda, which means if you came here with another item to speak.
I did.
Okay, well, you might not get that opportunity if your 3 minutes is spent talking about the agenda.
Well, we have been talking, it has been discussed before, so I figure I could get it away, but if you're not going to give me an additional,
Well,
then I better throw in what I need to do.
Yeah, what I'm saying is I'm not sure you understood that. This is his 3 minutes, and we're talking about.
On my 3 minutes.
You're on your
Yes,
3 minutes.
you're
So
on.
we're discussing, okay, so maybe you can continue the discussion after my other issue, which I'm going to throw on the table, and then, it's regarding the Mills Act. The Mills Act, and I think it should be thrown back on the table. It needs to be discussed, and I did request a copy of the Mills Act, and I never received it, so I could present more of the Mills Act issues to the commission. And so, I think this is a problem when you try to get information so you can interact with this commission, and you don't get it. It's a problem. And if nothing else, because you review the Mills Act, so I assume, but the community has not received it. I mean, it's been given to the commission, but it hasn't been given to the community to review. Like, obviously, this commission has reviewed what the updates to the Mills Act, I assume. So I'm going to request again to get a copy of the Mills Act so I can interact with that. But my question is, have you reviewed the Mills Act? What is your opinion about the Mills Act?
Thank you, Ed. We appreciate your comment. Are there any other, no, No, you can't come up again.
I just want to
No.
say that I got the agenda, but it didn't have the documents. I didn't get the documents until Friday. So I would just like to ask staff when they send out.
No, Becky, no, your time is up.
Thank you.
You can
I'm just
certainly, if you
clarifying.
want to talk to the planning department, you can do it outside of this commission.
I will, thank you.
All right, are there any other people who haven't been up?
Yes, good morning, Bruce Tanner. I just want to say that the way that government operates in general and in this county specifically is extremely adversarial with the public, and that you can't accept additional communications from the public. Who does that benefit? That doesn't benefit anyone at all. It maybe saves you a few minutes. You have one meeting every couple of months. So, I'm very curious. Commissioner Phillips, who wanted you to read everybody the Riot Act about how we have to comport ourselves in these meetings? It would seem to me that you could benefit from accepting input from the public. It's very unseemly from my point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, the agenda item number 4, public communications, is done. We'll move on to number 6, public hearing items. And this is for alterations to a designated historic residence located at 2721, let's get it straight, East Cliff Drive in Santa Cruz. So Annie, do you want to start this agenda item?
Yes, thank you, Chair Phillips. Can you hear me all right? Pardon? Can you hear me okay? I feel like my mic is a little bit...
No, I can hear you. How
Okay.
about,
You're good.
Okay, good.
Even I can hear you.
So this is a historic preservation plan for alterations to 2721 East Cliff Drive in Santa Cruz. This application requires review and approval or determination by your commission. The applicant is Rennie Boyd Architect. The property owner is Sarah Lloyd, and both the applicant and property owner are in attendance today to answer any questions. 2721 East Cliff Drive is an East Lake Victorian residence that was constructed in approximately 1895. The residence faces Twin Lakes Beach to the south in Santa Cruz. This is a photo from the 1890s that is part of the Santa Cruz Public Library online photo collection, and the photo was provided by Linda Lawrence. So you can see the house in the left corner of the photo. And you can also see the L-shaped gable roof, and you can make out the octagonal porch here in the corner. This is a former hotel and a former church in the area. And this is a photo of a similar area that is now East Cliff Drive that was taken in 2017 at Google Maps photo. The ocean is here to the left. And you can see the house here, the same Victorian, and here as well. And the house appears to be the only remaining structure from the Victorian era that is still visible. Newer residents are built very close to the east side and the west side of the historic property. This is a photo from the 1986 DPR form that is the inventory listing for the property. The property is rated NR5, meaning local historic significance. The inventory indicates that it's significant due to as a fine architectural representation of the East Lake Queen Anne design. And you can see the inventory form also notes the L-shaped residence with the cross gable roof. For this application, The staff required an analysis by a qualified historic consultant evaluating the application for conformance with the Secretary of Interior standards and with the criteria in the Santa Cruz County Code. This report is from Leslie Dill, who is a qualified historic architect meeting the Secretary of the Interior standards. The Dill report identifies the historic character defining features of the residence, which include the horizontal siding and the fishtail siding under the roof gables, the barge board trim of the porch, the windows, most of them double hung, the steep front yard with the retaining wall, the front porch handrail and beams. The Dill report also notices alterations or added elements, indicating that these do not contribute to the historic significance of the property. These include the rearmost addition and rear porch and the new front door. Another alteration was the removal of the windows in the lower front that are visible in this earlier photo. And you can also see in this photo more clearly the front porch railing. The goals of the alteration project were to preserve and rehabilitate the residence, consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards and the criteria in the Santa Cruz County Code. The proposal includes excavating the basement area to create more habitable space, alter the roof at the rear non-historic portion for a more comfortable ceiling height. So in this photo, you can see where the roof angle changes here at the rear. So this flat roof portion was part of the historic residence, but this kind of very back portion where the roof slopes down was a more recent alteration, and it appears to be originally a porch that was later walled in to create more indoor space. This is another photo of the west and east elevations. From these top photos are taken from the street, and this is the west elevation taken from the back of the property, and the east elevation from the back of the property. The east elevation is really not visible from the street except for the roof gable here and the porch. And then the west elevation, this is the front part of the residence that's seen in this photo. So this rear portion is not visible view from the street. So the proposed alterations at the main level of the residence are to restore and repair the historic features as identified in the report, including the siding, the entry doors, the fish scale shingles, and to repair windows where feasible, or if not, to replace in kind with wood frame windows. At the basement level, the proposal is to excavate 2 feet under the existing floor level and raise the ceiling height 1 foot to create habitable space in this area. A new foundation would also be installed to help extend the life of the residence. A new door would be installed at this front level, and new windows and a walkout patio. And then the siding would be, new vertical wood siding would be added as well. So this is the front of the residence, which faces south. At the rear, for the non-historic portion, this would be reconstructed to allow access to raise the structure and excavate the basement area. And then this portion of the roof would be modified to add a rear-facing gable roof, and this would allow the ceiling height in this portion of the residence to be raised approximately 1 foot, from 7 feet to 8 feet to provide a more comfortable ceiling height. New windows would be installed as well, and the siding orientation is changed to vertical siding to help identify this as a newer alteration. This is the east elevation, and again, restoring the features at the main level of the residence. At the lower level, installing new wood frame windows or some glass block windows as well. And this illustration shows again the historic and non-historic portion of this added gable roof would be visible from the rear of this elevation. And this is the west elevation, similar to the east, restoring the main level features, installing windows at the lower level, and here you can again see the rear-facing roof gable at the rear portion. So as noted, this project required submittal of a historic analysis by a qualified historic consultant. So the Dill report reviewed the project for compliance with the Secretary of Interior standards and with the Santa Cruz County Code, and found the proposed alterations to be consistent with these requirements. The project preserves and restores character-defining features. The siding at the lower level, new siding is compatible with the historic features. And alterations, including a new rear roof and the new windows at the lower level, are compatible with historic features, but are also sufficiently differentiated to identify them as alterations. Staff also required a letter from engineering, and Buchanan Engineering indicated that the structure is constructed solidly with full dimensional lumber and balloon framing, and capable of being raised to install the new foundation. The project, since the project is consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation, the project is categorically exempt from SEQA review, and a negative declaration has been prepared. Excuse me, a categorical exemption has been prepared, not a negative declaration, and that is included in your packets. So to conclude, staff recommends that your commission open the public hearing, approve the proposed CEQA exemption, which is Exhibit B in your packets, and approve the historic preservation plan as submitted, Exhibits D and E, based upon the attached findings, and subject to the recommended conditions of approval as provided in the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Is there anyone here for this agenda item? So are you the two owners?
I'm the owner.
Sarah Lloyd and Neil Trevitt?
Neil Trevitt's not here.
I'm architect Brady Boyd.
And you're Neil?
I'm Sarah Lloyd.
Sarah.
Neil is not here.
Okay, well, thank you for coming. So I'm going to open this up to the commissioners for questions on the plan to make these modifications. Does anyone have any questions? Annie, can you go back a few slides to where it's showing the before and afters? So there. What are block glass windows? I'm assuming that's the one to the far right on the bottom, the basement area?
Yep, go right ahead.
Yes.
Good morning, Randy Boyd, architect and applicant. Excuse me. The windows that we're looking at on this side of the building are standard, some operable, some fixed windows. The glass block that you're referring to are on the other side, on the east side of the building. And those are required because the building is so close to the property line that the fire code requires a solid wall, and a glass block is equivalent, or can be equivalent, to a 1-hour fire rated wall, which is what we need because it's very close to the property line.
So is that the one that's by the back stairs?
It's the one under the gable end windows. You can see.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was
Those are the
looking
glass
for.
blocks.
So according to the architectural drawings, The design is to have a living area, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom in the lower or new enlarged basement area.
Correct.
And then the street level is the kitchen, dining room, another bedroom, and another bath.
Correct.
So you're basically separating the functions of the 2 floors.
Right.
And I didn't realize this because it's, in a way, I'd never seen it before, but actually there's 2 front doors.
On the front porch.
Yes.
Kind of at right angles to each other.
Exactly, there you go.
Could
And
not
it's-
tell you why, but that is the case, yes.
Yes, so that currently the one on the left goes into the living room and the one straight ahead goes into the kitchen.
Correct.
Yeah, I found that very interesting. Oh, thank you for that picture. So on the front here, in one of these, that looked like a door.
Yes, I believe it's always been a door on the lower level.
Yes, in front of what will end up being a concrete and paver front area.
Yes.
And that's where you're going to be putting the door with the 2 lighted panels.
Yes.
So that would basically be an entrance to the living room.
To the lower level, not the living room, as I see it, is the one above with the large window there. So this would be the entrance to the lower level.
To the lower level. So that it would be basically a private entrance.
It's another entrance to the house, yes.
Right. Okay. It's a lovely house.
Yeah.
It is. It's really, really lovely.
It needs some love too at this point.
So do the commissioners have any questions as to the changes they're proposing to?
This is estimated construction date is 1895. Is that because that's when the Baptist church was built?
Everything we've seen is approximate.
It all
Yes.
kind of got built.
Yeah.
So there's no idea who the architect was?
Not that we've been able to find.
Has anybody looked to see?
Our consultant did a certain amount of research on it and wasn't able to.
Yeah, you can't find it. It looks very much like a Van Cleek design, and his house is in Santa Cruz, Van Cleek.
Okay.
And has the same kind of, I know that the fish scale is
Yeah.
typical, but if you were to look at his house, or if you look at photographs of Capitola and the Six Sisters, very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Van Cleek also.
The same era.
Yeah, same time.
Yeah.
I think the Six Sisters was 1905.
Okay.
So it's that era, and that's just a place to look. But this is probably the outstanding building remaining from that Baptist campground.
Yeah.
I used to work right there and would walk around the neighborhood and look at the buildings. And, I don't know if there are any others that might be the same architect that.
I'm not aware of anything else in the neighborhood of this age. So,
There used to be
Yeah.
1 or 2, but
There were.
not anymore. Yeah. Well, there you go. It's an awesome picture.
They're still surrounded by the buildings.
Okay.
Well, that's what I was curious about in looking at this 1890s picture. Is there any other of these structures still there, i.e. the church? I know water towers came down, but
The church is now Janus of Santa Cruz.
is what?
Janus Alcohol and Drug Treatment Center.
Oh.
South of Carmel.
Oh, okay.
That's, this building was demolished, that church. It was Twin Lakes Baptist Church. And a new one was built, and then they left that one for their site in Aptos.
Ah, so that actual building
It's gone.
is gone.
It's been gone since the 50s, I think.
Oh.
Late 40s.
Well, I know in the presentation, they said that they thought that this house was the only building of these that were left.
I think there might be some others in there. The building that you see right to the middle,
The big one?
the big one, that's the Surf Hotel, and that burned at some point. So that's gone. But that has similar architecture also. Anyway, I just wanted to say that, I was really pleased to see that Leslie Dill and her consultants were involved in this, because they do a very thorough job.
Yeah, I enjoyed working with her and him. We went through several iterations with the design, starting with a second story to try to match the existing architecture, and then we're sort of directed away from that approach to one that differentiates the new from the old and the historic from the non-historic portions of the building.
That's always difficult, because for a long time they were encouraging it to be very different.
Right.
So that it would be not...
glaringly different. Yeah.
Glaringly different, yeah, so it wasn't really compatible.
Right.
And this is very compatible.
Thank you.
Changes are, seem slight, and it's very smooth. I mean, the whole thing to me just seems very smooth. Really nice.
Thank you.
The changes are going to be to the rear. A lot of them, where it's not as essential to. And I'm really pleased to see that it's going to have a foundation.
Yeah.
That will give it a future.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, any other comments from the commissioners before yes?
I'm kind of wondering about the landscaping in the front, because they're taking some of it away, and it's going to the county for review. Could that change the plan at all, or what will happen with the county review of the landscaping?
I'm sorry, what will happen with the what review?
Well, it says that staff recommends that the landscape plan be submitted to the County Historic Resources Planner for review to ensure that the site is sufficiently landscaped to provide an appropriate setting for the Victorian residents. So that wouldn't change any of the plan particularly. I take it that the garden is going to get squeezed a little tighter.
Right, yeah, they are proposing the patio and I think some flagstones as well, so I just, the inventory form notes that the yard setting is part of the character of the house, so I want to make sure that there's sufficient landscaping for the house so that it doesn't take away from that setting.
How much space do they?
Good.
Do you offhand, I don't know if it says, what the square footage is of the front there?
Well, the existing house is approximately 935 square feet.
Well, this is just that
Heating area.
front area, where you're putting the concrete and the flags.
Oh,
That
I'm
would
sorry.
be
Okay.
Front yard.
In the front yard. I'm going to guess about maybe 300 square feet of patio, which is actually submerged from the existing grade, which is behind this retaining wall, so none of that will be visible from the street. We still have a good enough area in the front yard for the landscape border between the street and the patio.
And you're keeping the retaining wall and the wood arbor.
Yes.
Being you have absolutely zero backyard, being able to make the front of it what you do have more usable is a very good idea. Anything else? All right, then I thank you very much. And I will open it up for public comments on this agenda item.
Thank you. Good morning again, Becky Steinbruner. I want to thank the owner for doing this good work and to preserve what is obviously a real treasure in that area, and making improvements but keeping them in character with the building's architecture and its importance. I do have some questions, and again I want to thank the owner for not asking you to demolish it. I've seen that too many times, so thank you. I have questions. Will so the building's going to be raised up so it can be excavated 2 feet below. Will there be an archaeologist on site? This building was built where it is in estimated 1895. Who knows what could be under there? And I would like to make sure that there is someone knowledgeable of those possibilities there on site, watching over and cataloging anything that is found. And also, does the Native American community need to be notified of this excavation? I'd like to know when the rear addition was done, and was that with approvals? Was that before a commission, historic commission? How did that happen? And was it before this building was designated an NR5? And I also had questions about those windows, and just ask that they not be modern windows for energy efficiency, but windows that will mirror the historic windows in the structure. And I also want to ask if this new habitable area will be sprinklered for fire protection. Thank you very much. And thank you again to the owner and architect.
Annie, I imagine there's some of these questions that you can answer, and if it's appropriate, have the architect come back up. But let's start with you.
Okay. Let's see. In terms of an archaeologist being on site, the condition of approval recommended with this historic preservation plan is that if any artifact or other evidence of a Native American cultural site that reasonably appears to exceed 100 years of age, or if human remains are exposed, activity shall cease and desist until an archaeological site department approval can be issued. So this project also requires a coastal development permit, which is another discretionary project. So after your commission has finalized the review of the historic preservation plan, then this will also be looked at again for that purpose. So there may be additional conditions regarding the archaeology, depending on what the mapping identifies in the area, if it's a sensitive site. Let's see, in terms of Native American notification for this type of work, it doesn't require notification of Native Americans unless there's something identified. So I don't know if it was able to be determined when the rear porch was enclosed. And however, it was some time ago in the past. Looking at the windows and siding, I mean, I would guess it would be maybe somewhere in the 40s to 60s, but definitely before the property was added to the inventory. In terms of fire sprinklers, this would again be subject to review by the building staff, who would determine whether fire sprinklers were required. So those are, I believe, the questions that were asked that I can respond to.
Windows.
There was a question about the windows.
The type of windows. I guess maybe can we get a little explanation of those? I want to just the new front door and the two side windows. Yeah, in the front.
So could we ask Rennie? I'm sorry, I'm looking for your last name. Boyd. If we could ask Mr. Boyd to come up again and
Sure.
address the window question?
Well, again, we're trying to find the Goldilocks zone between imitating the old and creating something very new and contemporary. So what we're proposing is I think a combination of casements and fixed panes, simple sash, no mullions, would kind of confuse the issue. And the lower level, I would hope to make double glazed for energy purposes. The existing, which are single glazed, are original and authentic, and they'll be repaired as much as possible. I think there may be one or two that needs to be rebuilt, but generally we'll be able to just repair what's there in place. Does that answer
Think
your
it would
question?
be wood frame?
Yes, wood frame.
Actually, I have a question for Annie. One of my questions was procedurally, because I don't see the conditions for this plan in our packet, which is probably...
The conditions were provided at the end of the staff report rather than as a separate attachment. So if you look on page 5 of your staff report, the conditions of approval are listed there.
Oh, so it's just a recommendation with 1 through 5?
Yeah, the following conditions of approval. So yes, those are the conditions
Okay.
of approval.
All right, thank you. So is the coastal development permit, is that administrative, or is it another public hearing that they go through?
I believe it is a public hearing permit. I would have to verify that. I know it has public notice. I don't know for certain if it's a public hearing.
Okay. Is there, I guess, okay, never mind, there's the condition. That's it.
Is there anyone else that would like to make a comment on this application? All right.
I have another question.
Okay.
About the archaeology, observing, digging underneath the building. Hasn't the county at some point mapped out all the areas where there's likely to be Native American objects, or, places where people lived?
Yes, the county has done that, so that will definitely be considered as part of the coastal development permit. If this is like a mapped archaeologically sensitive site, then different criteria apply.
And this site is not, hasn't been, in the past has been looked at and nothing was found in that area, then it's not as likely to be, have somebody watching. In other words, it would be more of a case where an artifact would appear before it would trigger having an observer.
Yes, and if it's in a sensitive area and it hasn't been previously surveyed, then generally they would also require an archaeological report of the site as well.
Okay. Because in my talking to archaeologists in the past, this area was not believed to have a resident population. So that puts me at ease a little bit about that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, Carol, because on the side issue, our Preservation Society supports, and our goal initially to this commission is to make it easier for people that are trying to keep our historic cultural resources in our area. And really, it ought to be done to where somebody from the county be assigned, so it's not a burden on these people trying to do the right thing, putting them over the coals. I mean, not that I don't think we should save our historic cultural resources, our artifacts. Of course, that's a given. But it should be done in a way to where it's not such a financial burden and a stall process for these people to restore buildings. It makes the community nice, and without a history, we have no feature. So here's a perfect example that Carolyn mentioned, that if there is something that has Native American awareness or not, that it be utilized so there's not hooks to where it slows the process or is a grind for a person trying to restore an old house that's a benefit to the community and the neighborhood. So I just wanted to throw that in there. I'm sure there'll be a further discussion about that, but I figured I'd put an issue in, why Carolyn brought it up, because I agree, where she's coming from. But I like to have these other issues being considered in discussion in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, then, if there's nothing else, are we ready to make a motion?
I'll just say I appreciate the effort that the applicant took to minimize the modification necessary to transform this residence, so thank you. Yeah, and as well the property owner to preserve it for future generations. So if we're ready, I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay, so all in favor? Aye. Those opposed? And the motion is passed. That was nice. So many of our, we have recommendations and sometimes requires a second visit. It's nice this was so clean and smooth.
With a lot of working closely with the applicant to get us where it is, so I appreciate their patience in getting it.
Well, I concur with the board here. I think we all appreciate the preservation of this building. And unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to look at it, but I have errands down toward Capitola Way this afternoon, so I'm going to drive by and look at your house. All right, so moving on, number 7, we have no new business. Agenda item number 8. Going to talk about our demolition of a historic resource topic. So, Annie, you want to make your comments?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Phillips. This is a report back on the feasibility of updating the application requirements in Chapter 1642 for demolition and partial demolition of a historic resource. As your commission may recall, at the last meeting, I reported on the requirements in the Santa Cruz County Code regarding applications for demolition of a historic resource. As noted in today's minutes, or minutes from the April meeting rather, staff will take a number of actions, including clarifying definitions in the code, requiring peer review of the engineer's report from the applicant by an engineer affiliated with the county's historic resources consultant, and clarifying application submittal requirements. Today, staff is reporting back on the feasibility of updating the required findings for demolition of a historic resource as requested by your commission. So in order for the Historic Resources Commission to recommend approval of demolition or partial demolition, and for the Board of Supervisors to approve an application for demolition, the Santa Cruz County Code requires an historical documentation report which contains information which supports the claim that preservation is not feasible due to the deteriorated condition of the structure or object, or would create exceptional hardship, or is necessary to alleviate a dangerous condition. The approving body must find that the documentation report supports one or more of these criteria or findings in order to approve the application for demolition or partial demolition. I also want to make sure your commission is aware that in applying these findings, the county rarely even accepts applications for demolition or partial demolition of historic resources. Staff informs owners that demolitions are approved only in extreme cases where it can be clearly demonstrated in a document that preservation or restoration of the structure is not feasible. So we do interpret these findings very strictly. In order for, the code also states that in order for, that in terms of the requirements for the historic documentation report, that the guidelines for the report are to be established by the commission. So your commission has a lot of authority in determining what should be included with applications for demolition. Staff has consulted with the planning director, who recommends that rather than going through the code amendment process to update these findings, your commission work with staff to develop administrative guidance regarding what information should be included with the historic documentation report that is necessary to support the required findings. New administrative guidance can be developed and implemented much more quickly and with less staff resources than code amendments, as updating administrative procedures in accordance with the authority as provided in the existing code does not require a public hearing before the Board of Supervisors. So the current requirements for the historic documentation report were included with your packet. And one option for your commission to consider would be to form a subcommittee to discuss what additional information should be submitted in the historic documentation report and then report back to the commission. For example, a claim that preservation is infeasible or would create an exceptional hardship, the applicant be required to submit financial information regarding the cost to rehabilitate a residence with their documentation report. The commission could also research what other communities require to submit for applications for demolition of a historic resource. So thank you. That concludes my comments.
I have a question. The Special Investigations Report, what does that cover? What is the focus of that?
So it's a historic documentation report, and the documentation report. So in order for the county to approve an application for demolition, the applicant has to demonstrate with a lot of evaluation and documentation from professionals that preservation is not feasible due to the deteriorated condition of the structure or object, or would create exceptional hardship, or is necessary to alleviate a dangerous condition. So one thing that I always require is a report from an engineer evaluating the condition of the structure to determine whether those findings can be made for the application.
So the Special Inspections Report is written by an engineer,
Well,
focused on the criteria that would support demolition.
so that's one thing that's required. Typically, we would also require an evaluation by a historic resources consultant as well, evaluating the application. And then, so the sort of one of the main points of the discussion as well is if generally when I receive an application for demolition, I can also review and see if other information should be required, but your commission has the authority to formalize this and say this is all the information that we would like to see with the documentation report for demolition applications. So your commission has the authority to specify that.
I know my concern with this has always been, how do you define hardship? Extreme hardship. And I'm not sure I caught everything about how do I handle that. And my other question is, get advice from a historical resources consultant. And I know there was something when we were at that conference that talked about when consultants clash, you know, how it's possible to have one consultant that comes in and says, we can't save this building. Another one will say, oh, yeah, you can, you know. I mean, historical consultants don't always agree. And so I don't know how is the choice made when historical consultant is picked?
Well, we do require that they select someone who meets the Secretary of the Interior standards, but generally the applicant is paying for their report, and so as long as they select someone who meets those qualifications. But then, of course, for something like this, we would also have the county's on-call historic consultant review, so provide another professional set of eyes.
That's what puts me at ease.
I'd like to just throw something out there for us to think about. I saw a whole, well, I shouldn't say rash, six to eight emails from other cities and counties in the state that are similar to our planning staff representative, specifically talking about demolition and what their cities or counties require. And I think almost all of them mentioned a date. If a structure, a building was over 45, 50 years old, whether or not it was on the inventory, it was reviewed and to see before they allowed it, and they looked for if it had any historical significance. And some even took that extra step of saying, well, it's 60 years old, there is historical significance, we're going to put it on the inventory even though the owner has not either thought of it or done it.
Or doesn't want to.
Or doesn't want to, and saying, well, but we're looking into the future. So I notice in what we're thinking about, that extra step has not been discussed, and so I wanted to open it up as do we want to go that extra step or not? I know we've discussed in regards to the blue plaque and so on that there are people who don't want that historical.
Well, I think there's a whole process that you have to follow. Is that not true?
Yes, so this section of the code applies specifically to properties that are in the inventory in terms of what the application submittal is required if they are a designated historic resource. For demolition of properties that are not on the inventory, generally under CEQA, a property can be potentially significant if it's 50 years old or older. So for when someone applies for a discretionary application where we can subject the property, at that point the project is subject to CEQA, and we do look at the property, and if it appears to potentially qualify, then we do require a historic report as part of the CEQA review. But that's sort of a separate topic of this is specifically regarding what's required for designated properties.
And it sounds almost like that would be a slightly different criteria or procedure if they're not on the inventory already. So this is two separate focuses, procedures, one for listed, and if we want to, then going on and talking about the other at a future meeting. And I would open that to the commissioners on finding out what the county does, and do we want to do anything else?
Yeah, because I think this topic is focused on documentation for demolition of historic resources and what's your commission
right now.
Right, if your commission wants to. I know Carolyn mentioned how do we determine what's an extreme hardship? And I do think that's sort of vague in the code, so the documentation could say, you know, for claims of extreme hardship, this following information should be provided. That could be an example of how the documentation could be more clear.
What I'd recommend is maybe we, as a commission, work with staff to research and trying to find what that exceptional hardship means. And I know that there are other codes in other jurisdictions that go further in defining that and looking at financial information, structural information, and actually have really clear spelled out requirements that a property owner would have to provide to show that this was an exceptional hardship that we would have to support.
That sounds good to me.
Annie, I have a couple of buildings in my area where the owner has refused to do anything with the property because it's too expensive. So he's allowing the property to just fall down. You got anything to say about that?
I think, are these properties designated historic?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think that is, I know, another topic of concern to the commission and me as well, and that sort of demolition by neglect of like, what do we do when someone is not maintaining their property? And I believe that we have that scheduled to discuss again on the agenda for October. Yeah, this topic is about when someone actually applies for demolition, but that is a concern that we need to discuss again as well.
And that's in October?
Correct.
What if you're dealing with Camel Holly? Should I go up and talk to them?
Or I can talk to you afterwards about that specific topic if you like.
So on your attachment 2, and this is the procedure for going through applying for a demolition or partial demolition. Down here under the public ad, display ad in a paper of general circulation. So this is this something that's in, that's done now, or we're voting on this being the application requirements as well as what you have in bold at the top?
So this attachment is from Chapter 1642.060, demolition procedures for designated historic resources. So this is the exact
Okay, so this is what's done.
Yes, this is the current regulations, right? So these procedures are followed when there's applications for demolition of historic resource. I'm not proposing any changes to the existing language, but as you can see, it does say that the documentation report prepared according to guidelines established by the commission. So that's kind of what we're focusing on, is what those should be.
Okay, so this is posted in the newspaper twice during a 30-day period, and then it is posted posted at the site. I'm trying to quickly refresh my memory.
Well, the notice would be posted on the site because demolition applications require public notice in the newspaper and a public hearing before your commission. So those requirements are provided elsewhere in the code, but the notice is posted on site as well.
Okay. And then we have nothing to do with the actual salvaging of any materials.
That's correct.
Okay.
Although,
So is there any, so during the approval process here,
actually, I'm sorry, let me back up a minute. So in terms of, if you look at B double I there, provisions, so the documentation report also is required to include provisions to preserve the historic values of the structure or object by documentation and/or preservation of artifacts and building materials. So if someone were to apply for demolition and it was found to meet the criteria, they would have to include provisions to preserve the values of the structure, art, or object. And your commission would be reviewing that and could require, specific requirements and conditions necessary for that to.
okay, so we would know not only that building, the structure had been applied to be demolished, but as part of the packet would be a list of any historical, any artifacts that could be preserved or how they were going to if they couldn't. And I see over here they're submitting photographs and a special inspections report and so on. And we would see that.
Yes.
So if there was any question as to something they might not be aware of, we could bring that up. Have you checked for a Native American, or have you checked for this or that?
The good example that we've encountered probably most recently is the Aptos Firehouse.
Yeah.
And we got that proposal for early on. I don't know how many of you were on the commission at the time, but at first when they were considering that, they did advertise, does anybody want this building? And for a while they were even going to use it as a hyphen between the Aptos barn and the new building. We had a map that showed it. They were sticking it in there. They really were moving it all over, trying to find, because they had agreed to move it and save it. And then they couldn't. Then we got evidence that it was in bad shape and it wouldn't be saved.
Is your
And I
microphone
think,
on?
Please, Becky.
I can't hear her.
No comments.
I can't hear her. Is
I'm
she
sorry.
speaking into the microphone? That's what I want to know.
I'm speaking into the microphone.
Thank you.
Anyway, that was an example of where all of this took place. And I think at the time, the financial hardship question wasn't really a part of it. I don't remember that financial hardship came in as, it would be a financial hardship to save the building or restore it. Or it was more, so that's to me is why that remains an unanswered question. That sort of rises to the surface for me as the, what can we do to get a good definition of an exceptional hardship? Because we've seen how these things have played out in other applications that have come before us in recent years. We did get these reports.
And just so you're aware, we, to my knowledge, we never approved an application for demolition solely on the basis of financial hardship, although if someone came in and said, it says right here, so I think it would be good to have that because, someone could apply and, say, well, it says one of these conditions and mine is the financial hardship, so I do think it would be helpful to have requirements for what that actually means.
For me, that what comes up as in memory, it's not a building in the county, but there's a Santa Cruz building, La Bahia, where they said, it's a special circumstance. They wanted to tear down La Bahia and build this enormous hotel. because of special circumstances. And the special circumstance was that they would not be able to make as much money as they wanted. I mean, it was a financial hardship condition, and which just was a problem because, well, it was a problem for me. So that's just another example of how that can matter, how that can come up as a kind of red alarm.
I have a historic property in my district that was ragtagged 20 years ago, and the owner just said, no, it's too expensive to do anything, and they're using it for storage. But they're not doing anything to try and preserve it. So, yes, these are things that...
Well, I'm thinking if, I don't know what the rest of you are, but if getting a definition of an exceptional hardship is kind of what we want, and it sounds like Annie was saying we needed a subcommittee or something that would look into what other cities, counties, that does some research on what an exceptional hardship is.
Yeah, I think that would be a good way to approach it.
Okay. Getting some clarity here.
And,
Sorry.
Oh, what?
Then what happens after you've decided it's an exceptional hardship and the building is in need of repair, and then nobody will, is there any way for somebody to come to the owners so that it can be done?
Somebody.
Well, maybe I'm not explaining it correctly, but, oh, right. You've got an exceptional hardship. It's been okayed to demolish it. But the building is in good shape. Kind of in good shape. And it could be fixed up pretty well. But it's going to cost $25,000 to do it.
But then you come back to all these other things. You'd have a historian. There's all these other requirements that would need to be met before the demolition is okay. And one of them would be a discussion of what shape is the building.
the historic documentation report must be prepared by a qualified historian, architectural historian, or architect, meeting the Secretary of Interior standards, and then all these information needs to be on that
Okay, so
report.
we've gotten all the way through that, and it still cannot be restored because the owner doesn't have enough money to go through the process. And this has happened on 2 buildings up in my area. So they just sit there and they continue to disintegrate.
I don't think, and I'm sorry.
No.
But I don't think there's anything in place, is there, to deal with when somebody says, I can't afford to.
No, there's
I
nothing.
think, yeah, is that right, Eddie? We don't really, if somebody says, I want to demolish it because I can't afford to fix it, there really isn't anything in place to require somebody to spend the money to fix the building.
And there isn't any pot of money that they can, a grant or whatever that they can apply for, from the county at least, to help them with making repairs.
Yeah, that's correct. It's difficult to find, if it's on the National Register, there oftentimes is some money available, but if it's not on the National Register, it's difficult to find financial resources available to assist with that.
For something just on the county level, historical inventory.
Right.
It's kind of a dilemma because you can have a really interesting building with lots of historic features, and they're saying it's, well, Capitola just happened. It's the oldest building in Capitola, absolute oldest building. And it's from 1850. 1850s, that's pretty darn early. And they, they went through this whole thing where they said, we're going to do this, we want to save this part. And I said, so what are the chances that when they start working, they're going to put their fist through the wall, and that the building won't be savable? And the architect said, pretty darn good chance. So I said, I like knowing that, in advance, that this building probably can't be saved. And we're talking about reconstruction rather than renovation.
So bringing it back around, what we are doing here, it looks like we want to put, the request has been to put together a subcommittee to work on a definition for exceptional hardship. Is there any commission members that would like to be on that subcommittee? All right.
Of course.
Oh, and, okay.
All right.
So, Commissioner Miriam? Close.
Good job. That was perfect.
And Commissioner Jenkins?
You can't have more than two.
Yeah, we'll be on a subcommittee and on working to qualify an exceptional hardship. And you'll let Annie know when you're ready to make the report.
Yeah.
So, I believe, so our next meeting is October 2nd. The one after that will be January.
Oh my gosh.
So just
We'll try and get something for the October agenda.
Okay. And this was simply a report, so there's nothing for us to vote on.
Correct. I do have the motion to, for Commissioner Marion and Jenkins to form a subcommittee and report back to the commission at the October meeting.
So I move staff's recommendation. Does anyone?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
And because there were,
See, that is this a topic the public?
yes, I was just going to open it up for public communication. And I should have done that before the recommendation, but
That's all right.
that's okay. So if there's anything, any notes or whatever for your committee?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes, Ed Silvera with Philibert Supporting Preservation Society. All this is very good. The commissioners that actually should be on the commission regarding the reality of these serious concerns we've had for years. And we just got two commissioners that are more known for yah-yah, knock them down, to be signed to make the decision. This is, I protest. I mean, you're putting things in place, but then you just assign the commissioners that are more likely to knock down buildings and save them. It doesn't make any sense at all. It's like you're recognizing something that needs to be done, but you're handing it to somebody that's not going to do it. So we protest this process right now. It's like you're recognizing a serious concern we've had for years on protecting our historic cultural resources, but you just approve somebody that has a reputation of rather knocking buildings down than keeping them. So we protest this situation here. It's a classic example of trying to do good but not do good. So you need to do better here. So back to the Mills Act, what you brought up earlier. What is helping people? So it's not a burden. At least the Mills Act was a consideration to where there's an easement on their taxes. So a certain amount of money that would go to property taxes would go into repairing these buildings so they're not in harm's way of people not being able to afford it. I'm sure you can appreciate that. I mean, it's a no-brainer, but yet it doesn't get it doesn't get exercised. Like the intention's there, and even the documentation and articles that were done several years ago about trying to help people to keep their buildings so they can afford to do it. I mean, some people were in old buildings because they inherited them, but this community is very hard financially on people that grew up here. So I'd like you to reconsider this. And again, we protest this situation here, where it needs to go to people that just recognize the concern than giving it to commissioners that are more have a history of knocking down buildings. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Danny, does Santa Cruz County have a Mills Act?
No, that's not.
So you can't apply to the Mills Act for any money because we don't have one.
That's correct.
Didn't we just discuss this?
We did discuss it again, and we'll, the plan is to, it requires board action, and it requires a dedication of an agreement by the county to accept less in property tax. So it's, requires sort of agreement by all levels of the county government for that to occur. But we do have plans to bring it back to discuss again in January, and Commissioner Merriam provided us some presentation previously on the Mills Act.
Yes.
Thank you, Becky Steinberg, a resident of Aptos. Thank you, Commissioner Orlando, for bringing up the Mills Act again. I remember the presentation. It was very good that Commissioner Merriam did give, and it all ended with, well, this will require action from the Board of Supervisors. I would like to ask your commission to make the recommendation to the Board of Supervisors that they do agendize it and discuss it. I would also like to recommend that your commission make the recommendation that all permit fees be waived for projects that will preserve historic resources. As Commissioner Orlando said, many people have these properties but cannot afford the process, and it is not a cheap process. If we can do anything to give incentives for preservation, that's what we need to do, and that's what I would like to ask your commission, to make those recommendations specifically to the Board of Supervisors and bring it before the public on an agenda item. Commissioner Swift, thank you for bringing up the Aptos Firehouse. That building was given up for demolition because the case was made that it was hazardous. After it was red tagged and determined by a county building inspector to be too hazardous, Tesdorf Construction made their office in it for over 3 years before a member of the public pointed it out to the planning department, and then Tesdorf was quickly evicted. But they lived in there for their office building for over 3 years after the demolition permit was awarded, and on the basis of that it was too hazardous. The building at 8057 Valencia made the case for demolition because it was not feasible, and your commission did not even ask for any verification. That was quite distressing as a member of the public. In both cases of these demolition, with the one on Valencia being called a partial demolition and not one stick of anything was left except for the beam that I saved and is now in the Aptos History Museum. Not one stick was saved. That needs to change. Your commission needs to require that you do an on-site visit before anything happens, before any approvals are given. And that rather than just advertise in a paper, I saw those ads, they're little tiny micro things in the back of the legal notices. They need to be visible to the public. There needs to be a sign put at the site. There was no demolition salvage request at the site of either. And there needs to be a list of local craftsmen developed so that when these demolitions and partial demolitions are approved, they are directly notified so that they can go in. At the Valencia Street, a craftsman came up and was livid. He had tried to talk with the developer and they refused. I'm just saying, there are a lot of improvements we need to make here, and thank you for taking some steps.
Thank you. At this point, we're going to take a 10-minute recess. It is 11:01. We'll be back at 11:11. I just want to make a personal note about 2 weeks ago, my husband and I were going on a trip when we decided to go the southern way over to the Central Valley, and since we were bypassing it, I asked him to go down the frontage road, and the house is still there. It's all propped up with pallets, and don't know how long that's been.
What?
The Red Bin House.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry that you weren't able to get any information, any contact. So, thank you for your update. How do we want her to proceed?
What are our options when property owners don't respond with alacrity?
There aren't really, I guess, an obligation to respond to me, although I'll keep trying, so I'm sure. I did inquire if they have any ideas for what they possible uses for the house, because one possible option, which we can discuss in October for encouraging people to maintain their properties, would be to allow like a greater range of uses than what's normally allowed on a parcel. So we're not discussing the detail today, but just trying to find ways to incentivize people to repair buildings. But
it would be.
Could you talk on the microphone, please? It's important to hear you.
I know. I'm just sorry. I'm just stuttering at this point. I think it would be really a step forward if we could get some kind of communication, because it just seems like, okay, another year's going to go by, and they're still not responding, and we're still asking, and the house is still there, and I don't know, it just gets...
Do you have the feeling that they're trying to just ignore the whole subject of that property, not wanting to talk to the county, not wanting to talk to anyone about getting pinned down about what their plans are?
possibly, I don't really have a sense for that.
She doesn't have a crystal ball. It's probably most likely they don't have any plans. And so what is the procedure when there's something on the National Register that is crumbling and the owner doesn't respond? I mean, is there anything in place that, any action that we can take? It doesn't sound like there's anything we can do.
Since it's at a national level, is there anything at the national level? They must deal with this type of thing in other areas of the state, other states. You know, what, I'm with her, you know, you're calling, you're writing a letter, other than stopping pounding on the door.
Well, I mean, in a way, it's my attempt to get action by suggesting that we remove the historic status kind of didn't go anywhere. But the idea of that was to get a discussion, because that would force everyone to come to the table and say, what condition is this building in? I mean, that forces the issue. What condition is this building in? Can it be saved? And I mean, it's something to counter, it was an idea, to counter demolition by neglect. Either we sit there and watch it fall down, or we do something to some kind of action that would make people look at it and evaluate it. And that didn't go anywhere. It was not understood with the intention that I had. But So that's not a pathway.
I think, well, when I did my review last year on demolition by neglect for the commission, what other jurisdictions generally do is, or one option is to consider that the deterioration of a structure can be considered or designated as a nuisance and then followed up under code enforcement regulations and enforced, essentially forcing the property owner to at least weatherproof and maintain the building in a safe fashion. That's something that would require Board of Supervisors approval with the county because they don't have the link between the criteria for designating a nuisance tied to historic structures or any structures and their actual physical condition. That would be one stick that the county could use if they so chose.
It seems like everything, from our position, we want to set something in motion that would create an evaluation of the building's condition and preserve it.
Correct.
That's our goal. But it seems like in order to set something in action, we end up, we have to suggest things that either, we're declaring it a nuisance or we're saying it's no longer historical. And that's not where we want to come from, but we don't seem to have any other, we can't say, there's nothing that says to the owner, when you bought this property, you needed to address this building. And maybe, and they should be addressing that building. I mean, there's something, I know that it got newspaper coverage when the property sold. People said, oh, there's this whole building there. They're going to look at that, look at options for saving it.
Yeah, and we did, early on, Barbara Mason did a lot of research to try and identify potential funding sources, and there was even an organization that was interested in working with the owner to try and save historic buildings, but somehow that didn't happen, right?
Years.
So yeah, I know we do have the topic of demolition by neglect on our next agenda. Yeah, and I'll continue to try and reach out to the property owner. It is, frustrating, but I agree that, if we get communication channels open and some discussion, that would be helpful.
Yeah. I just feel like I'm on a record that keeps
Going around and around and around.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Annie, and we're all very sorry that you haven't had any success in contacting the owners. Any comments on this topic AB, the Redmond House?
Correction, Redmond Hara House. We don't want to forget that part of the house's history. It's critical. Becky Steinbrunner. I have spoken with you many times about this, and I'm really interested in trying to save this property too, because of the story of the Hirahara family and other issues of the house, the Weeks architect, the Redmond family. The whole history of this house is incredibly rich and needs to be saved. And I, with other interested members of the public, have gone to talk with Luis Alejo. We have contacted Jimmy Panetta. We have contacted members of the Redmond Hirahara Foundation and have a better picture of what happened with that effort. The owners, the Tutt family, across the street have a very significant financial venture with the city of Watsonville. And I want to ask Commissioner Miriam, as the Director of Economic Development for the city of Watsonville, to request a meeting with them. not necessarily regarding the Redmond Hirahara House, but I understand that they want to put in 2 very exclusive hotels on the city-owned city property across the street from the county property or county zone area of the Redmond Hirahara House. But these exclusive hotels have very strict guidelines about neighborhood blight. It could be said by some that the Redmond Hirahara House in its present condition is blight. So I think that the city of Watsonville and the director of the Watsonville City Economic Development, who probably has some pretty good connections with this project across the street with the hotels, could help us here. And I'd like to ask your help. I also want to again present to you the idea that our community group has been working on to expand, as you said, Ms. Murphy, the uses of the property. I did speak with Barbara Mason, and she feels that if the house were allowed to be an event center for weddings and things like that, it could become financially feasible. I also want to repeat Ms. Murphy's statement earlier that if a property is on the National Registry, there are funds, grant funds available for restoration, preservation. Who will take that upon themselves to research that and help? I will, and I'd love to work with you. But I need your position of authority to have it stick with anywhere in local government. I also want to tell you that I had a lot of trouble just with fire defensible space around it. The weeds were grown up last summer, and no fire agency would take any action. So it was a finger-pointing thing because of the odd figure of county surrounded by city, and nobody wants to take action, even when the weeds were growing up and presenting a nuisance at 4th of July.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
Ed Silver with Bill Grants 40 Preservation. We support Becky's comments, and we work with a lot of that ourselves. And we have a history with saving buildings that are even worse than the Redmond House. The UCSC barn's a classic example where UCSC did not want their barn preserved. They had bigger, better ideas, and it was a burden for them, this and that, and we pursued with some persons from some administrators that did want to preserve, and we fought for 2 years and shored it up, and now it's their hero. It's their main center. Having the community come, they charge $1,500 for 4 hours, $2,000 for 8 hours. They're making a lot of money, and now, you know, it's their jewel that they didn't want initially, and we figured this is even more so with the Redmond House that you see throughout the area. It's the main significant historic structure that you see when you go through Monterey or into Santa Cruz, and it's really could be a hub. So we support what Becky says, although we don't support regarding some of the Japanese families do not want to be a part of this process until there's some support. They were involved initially financially, and they were sort of insulted by that whole situation. And we think this commission should look into what happened to that money. What's going on with that group that initially the community tried to do the right thing? We think this commission ought to look into the situation. Where'd the money go? Why did this disperse, this positive thing that involved the community, descendants, and yet it just dissolved and the money's not being recognized? This is a thing that I think the commission at least ought to pursue to find out what happened, because it affects future organizations trying to preserve historic buildings as well. Thank you for consideration.
All right, thank you very much for your comments. Moving on to 8C, discussing cleanup of the historic resource inventory. And Commissioner Swift, you sent out another list.
No, it's the same one I sent out before. I mean, I sent you before.
So you're making me look back. I personally thought that it was very good, and certainly I know I'm going to want to be following your example, your format.
Well, I think the reason I did this was to give us, something to chew on. The idea, it's easier to figure out what format we want to take if we have something to tear apart. And so the idea is if we could, to establish, and Annie can give us some feedback. I looked at this after, because I did it several months ago, and I looked at it again recently and said, I'm not so sure I like it. So if we want to decide what kind of information the county needs, I mean, the county can tell us what kind of information it wants, what kind of update to the inventory we can make.
Yes, I have a few comments to make about sort of staff work as well as commission work for inventory updates. So most of my time does continue to be designated for long-range planning efforts as well as sort of ongoing work with the commission. But I do have some staff time available to certainly update the inventory to note alterations from approved historic preservation plans and to correct errors. And in terms of work that your commission can do on the inventory, so one possible approach would be to review the DPR forms that we do have for your district and drive by properties and note properties where the conditions have changed since the last inventory. And also you can notify me if a property appears to be in poor condition, and we could access the site and look at it further. So that's one task that I think would be useful in terms of noting conditions of structures. And then your commission can also identify errors and potential revisions to the DPR forms. I think there's sort of two levels. One would be sort of, I think, and you did that, Carolyn, some of like this is an error, we know this now, like the covered bridge, we know that it was never actually covered. And I think they're supported by documentation. Those kind of corrections can be made versus sort of another level of evaluation of, do we want to reconsider this historic rating that would require review and analysis by a consultant. So we don't have a large sum of money available for consultants to do, evaluation of current structures in the inventory, but we can certainly keep that information for when we do have survey funds available to do a more comprehensive survey. And I did provide some materials to your commission from the Secretary of Interior standards regarding sort of documentation for evaluations as well as the sort of evaluation process, but I thought that might be useful reading when thinking about corrections to the inventory. And I also can provide the commission with, if you do want to review properties inventory, I can provide you with better photocopies than are in the current inventory pages. We have a better copier now, so it makes much clearer photos, because the photos sometimes are very hard to make out. So, so those are my comments.
So is there, I think what I'm looking for is kind of a template to follow, Is there, if we go through the inventory, is there a way to gather our information in a certain way so it'll be a uniform we're all collecting kind of the same information, presenting it to the county in the same way. Is there?
And also, I think I agree, and also a template that is formatted in the way that you would deal with the information. So you're not jumping here and then jumping down here when you're doing this type of thing. You know, the order of the information as well as consistency and format from all of us.
And also, what kind of information is most helpful? I mean, because I just kind of went through and wrote down anything that I saw that was different. And I'm not sure that that's all helpful.
Yes, I think a template is an excellent suggestion, and I can provide that at the next meeting. In terms of what's most helpful, certainly I think noting the condition of the structures is helpful. Correcting errors is certainly helpful, so that, for example, if someone comes in and wants to apply to alter a structure, we would know what might be significant or not significant about the property.
I know ownership is also one. I had someone who, the apartment house, she got divorced, was not amicable. She would come in every so often and want to get her ex-husband's name off of the name of the house, you know, and as ownership. She didn't want his name on anything with hers. So that's an easy thing to find and fix, is ownerships.
Yeah, we have that information too in the county, so we can do that as well.
Well, that reminds me, the last thing on this, my 7 Mile House, actually recently came across a newspaper article saying that the original 7 Mile House burned in 1925. So we can substantiate that, that the 7 Mile House that's there now was built after 1925, and it's not the original.
Interesting, okay.
Yeah. So, got the newspaper connect on that. For me, having a template it's really all I need. Something I can put information into.
Okay.
Would we need, just a question, on the 7 Mile House, would we need to have any further expert review of that property to just bring that forward to take it off of the inventory?
Yeah, I think that I do need to do a little more review in terms of sort of when things would sort of cross the threshold from being a correction, you know, to something that requires, you know, sort of documentation by a qualified consultant. That is, if I didn't verify the status, but according to Carolyn, that's an NR6, so that means that it's actually not considered, it's not part of the inventory.
It slid off the inventory already.
Right, sort of, but the information in it is apparently not correct, so it's even less significant than they thought it was.
I actually went all the way back and tried to find who built it and who built the second one. And it turns Charlie Parkhurst had nothing to do with either of them. So it's not historic. It's a
Well, it could be historic for other reasons, since it's 1920. It's over 50 years.
Yeah, that's right. It's old, but it didn't.
It's not that one.
It may have had a good time during Prohibition, but other than that, it's just been.
Was there a motion regarding the template?
Yes. So, do we have a motion for Annie to design a template
Okay.
for providing her updated information to you from the historic resource inventory?
I will move that.
Okay, do we have a second? Okay. So Commissioner Swift has made the motion. Commissioner Jenkins is second. Is there any other
You know what it is?
comments? Is there any public comments?
Thank you, Becky Steiber, resident of Aptos. Commissioner Swift, I want to thank you for that work. That was a lot of work to put together that list. I saw it online when the documents attached to the agenda became available to the public on the website Friday, but it's not in the binder for the public to view here or out in the lobby, so the list isn't in the binder. But I did see the list, and I really want to thank you for your work. What I did not see on the website is the additional materials that are in the back this morning. I didn't see that on the website. So I didn't have time to read that until just this morning. But thank you for putting that together, Ms. Murphy. I would like to know, as a member of the public, where commissioners' research work is kept to determine status or evaluation of properties, whether or not they get added to the county's inventory. Is there a public repository where members of the public can go and see the efforts, like Commissioner Swift finding this newspaper article? How can we get that information? And I guess that's all. Thank you very much, and thank you for your work. I would really like to see an update of the total county's resources. Thank you.
Ed Silvera, Bill Bratz 40. We support Becky's comments. It is very significant that there be transparency so community gets involved. So it is important that this documentation could be easily reviewed than trying to hunt it down, a morning before a meeting. It's ridiculous. And I guess if it continues to be, then we're suggesting maybe a modification to the process to where it gives us at least a week before the meeting to review, to put positive input in to support this commission, but it would really be a help to make it easy for the community to have a little more of a heads up of the process than sort of giving us a morning before a meeting to review it, Thank you very much for your work and thoughts on this.
Thank you, Ed.
Can I just... It's my fault that it didn't get out sooner. I was after I got the agenda that I was reminded that I had promised Annie I'd get that information to her, so it was not until very late. And probably we could have waited a month. And we could have put it out next time, but
If I could just make a comment about late materials for the agenda. I had some late materials that I provided as well to the commission because I thought it would be helpful. But we do make those late materials available, so they are available on the back kiosk there, the materials from Commissioner Swift as well as the information from the Secretary of the Interior Standards.
And I had a question. What is the planning department policy about the historic research inventory being available to the public?
So the inventory is a hard copy, and it is available for the public to view on request. And then in terms of research that your commission does, that information is included in the files for the hearing. And then if it is, of course, at some point incorporated into the inventory, then that would become part of the inventory.
Just a quick question. I'm wondering if any of my presentation materials on the Mills Act or the demolition by neglect that I did last year could be uploaded to the website under those meeting dates, or were they?
Yes, I will do that. Thank you.
So, and just to clarify, these were PowerPoint
Yes.
presentation. And just to let you know, when you ask, every one of these properties, I know when I came on and replaced Barbara Kennedy, and Annie gave me the binder, I was just overwhelmed, because it is like this thick. It's not like that. It's a huge binder covering the entire county.
You got the entire county?
Yes, I got the entire county.
I only got Aptos and lots of buildings this thick.
No, I got all of yours.
Well, is that sorry to break in, but is that something that maybe we could look at scanning and also putting on the website?
Yes, we had a previous intern work on it, but there were so many errors we unfortunately weren't able to use that for. But yes, I would like to do that, and hopefully we can find some staff resources available to do that.
Maybe another intern.
As a side note, I took my section, my little binder, to John Hibble at the Aptos Museum, and he's copied it.
Oh.
So if somebody wants to see Aptos information, they could go to the Aptos History Museum.
Only if John is there.
Well,
I can't see it any other time.
that museum is lucky to be in existence. Without John, it wouldn't be there.
And just another public comment. Each of us has volunteered to update our section, basically the district that we've been appointed for, as we are able to do it in our free time. So, so far, Carolyn has been the one updating hers, and I know I myself have not had any time to deal with District 5, but we all will be working on our districts to update and send Annie the updates. So this is why we're talking about a common template, and for all of us to follow. We appreciate that Carolyn has been the one up front and center to help get this more standardized.
Yeah, but I just did Aptos.
No, but following what you're doing and seeing the kind of information and how you're phrasing it and so on is very helpful, I know, for me. So I hope that clarifies the whole thing, and this will be a continuing subject on our agenda.
On the note of Aptos, can I make another comment?
Sure.
I've noticed, I watch buildings that are, the building that was on Valencia Street that was demolished, and it's almost finished. I don't know if you've noticed it. The reconstruction is almost done. I mean, it's getting, the building is there, and then the one that burned has sold. The one on Valencia Street, we come up the hill, it burned. What's it? It's on the inventory. And it looks like they've taken the boards off, and some work is beginning on repair. So that was kind of a relief too.
I'm working with the applicant on that project, and it will be coming to the commission for review.
Oh, good. Cool.
Hopefully not demolition review.
So, is there any other comments? I think we have a motion that's out there. So any other comments by the commission? All right, so we have a motion for, Andy, do you want to read the motion back? Even though we've had a first and second, just to refresh our memories. So, I think it was for you to put it together a template.
Sorry, it's on this other sheet. Yes. Staff will provide a template to update information in the inventory. The motion was made by Commissioner Swift and seconded by Commissioner Jenkins.
All right, so we have a first and second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes.
How soon can this be done?
I can send a template out to the commission next week.
I would like to, if the commission is available, because it is getting awfully late. And I know, Susie, you're going to have to leave because you've got a job to get back to. We had this letter about the Portola, about the Catani, the Catani coast areas of a new national monument on the coast near north of Santa Cruz. And I know, Annie, you talked to him, and I know, Alberta, you've talked to Mr. Clay Peters. And I don't know if the rest of the commission, how familiar they are with the subject, but I'm still unclear. I know what the letters say, but I'm still unclear of where Mr. Peters and his committee group sees where the HRC fits into what they want to do. So I know you met with him, Annie.
Yes, so I did let him know that he is welcome to come and speak during open communications, and if your commission wants to agendize it, that could also occur. He's interested in having the site designated as a historic site. The property is owned by the Bureau of Land Management, and he's with a different organization. And I did explain to him that in order to be designated as a historic site, he would need to work with a consultant, probably who's experienced with cultural landscapes and what criteria would be appropriate. In our code, it says there, it needs to be associated with a particular event, and it sounds, the information that I've read, it sounds a little bit tenuous in terms of, the Portola expedition going through that area, but whether, there's enough significance associated with the site to be designated, that's sort of another question.
May I add something? I've been up to that site, and you cannot even see from the top where he was looking. You can't even see the Highway 1. And the only thing that is visible is the top of the cement plant's tower. And that's it has to be pointed out to you. And what his situation here and what he's trying to do here is to show what this looked like when the first pioneers came through. Now, when the Portola came through, it was covered with fog, so they didn't see too much of that. But I was reading some of the Portola expedition stuff, and it looks like they went directly through it. So I'll have to maybe get you some of that information. And then, Miss Monterey Bay. And so, but this shows exactly what the pioneers saw when the fog lifted and the cows came in.
Right, yeah, it sounds like a fascinating spot. I guess the question, one question would be whether it meets the criteria for designation, but if the commission is interested in having him speak, on as an agendized item, and I can certainly do that. I don't, I don't know if that would be enough in itself, if this is what it looked like when, before settlers were here, if that would be enough to say that, to make it a historic site, that would require some, further evaluation. But
Also, the Sentinel put out an article, and I thought I had it with me today, where somebody else attempted this several years ago, and figured that it had been protected because the BLM and Coast Arizona Land Company had gone through the efforts to protect the land. So with the view may be protected already, but I'm not sure.
That was what I was wondering was his concern that the BLM would allow us any type of development or either very minimal but development, so it would not
So
continue
far they've
in
allowed,
pristine.
so far they've allowed farming. So, they could do it again.
Now that you bring that up, I do remember reading an article that Canada had applied to the BLM for mining in the Canyonlands and Great Esplanade parks. And so maybe that's his concern, is if it could be under local designation, that area would not be touched. But I don't know where we come against the BLM if the BLM wanted to do that.
I don't think that a county regulation would have any effect on what the federal government wants to do with their land, unless, maybe the best way to go about it would be to designate it at the national level, so it would at least be on the same governmental playing field.
I have encouraged him to work with the BLM, and it sounds like feels like they're not very responsive, so he's trying to approach it another way, but
Yes, he talked about starting a new trust fund for this and to try and get money and so on. Does the commission want to have him come and talk to us about his idea?
I think it would be important for him to come and talk to you and show the slides of the area, or show something on the area.
Well, I've already taken a tour.
What was that?
Yeah, I took the class.
Is this area in the coastal zone?
yes.
Must be. Oh, there you go.
So it's also under the Coastal
Act.
Coastal Commission?
Yeah.
So we've got the federal, we've got the state.
Those are two pretty strong regulatory agencies that might be the best at protecting the view shed.
Right.
But I don't disagree that it would be interesting to have them come speak.
Do you happen by any chance to have the agenda for the October meeting?
No, that hasn't been prepared yet.
Okay, so we don't know if there would be room for him or not.
Well, if you like, I can certainly add it to the agenda.
Okay, I just don't want us to end up with a, 1:30 meeting span, and then poor Susie, like she's doing now, ends up having to leave.
Add to agenda time permitting.
Yes, if you could. And if not, maybe squeeze him in January. I don't think this is moving that fast. How do the commission feels about that? Does that look okay?
Yeah.
So if we can fit him in October, if not, then definitely January. Does that sound okay?
We can't vote to really do anything.
Yeah, this is information only.
Yeah.
Do we want to put a time limit on it?
Probably.
What do you mean by time limit?
Well, then he can speak for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Just something so that he can be sure his presentation is succinct.
I would think of 15 to 20 minutes, he could do it.
And if it's towards the end of the agenda, so that we don't have other business.
Okay. So tell him at the very max 20 minutes.
And I'll also look at other items on the agenda to see how much time I'll be
Okay.
available. No longer than 20 minutes.
All right, so then, And then the commissioner presentation, informational items? I guess not. Then, is there a motion to adjourn the current meeting?
I'll move to adjourn.
All right, second?
I'll second it.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Annie, do you need these now?
The meeting, the July 2nd meeting of the HRC
I didn't open
is
it. I mean,
concluded.
it's pristine.